When you hear mace, unless you're thinking pepper spray or the fighting game on N64, you're probably imagining a flanged or a spiked mace, even though there is a stunning variety of mace shapes. Possibly the least known form is the disc mace, which we're going to take a look at today. So first I'm going to show you historical examples, then the testing I did with this steel version, and finally I'll talk about my thoughts on the practical effectiveness of this weapon. If you're impatient, there will be timestamps so you can skip right ahead to the testing or whatever else you want, really. So first off, early disc maces from the Naqada I period of pre-dynastic Egypt, roughly 5,900 to 5,700 years ago. They were made of various types of sedimentary rock or igneous rock, which is solidified magma, and sometimes even marble. Typically, these are cone-shaped. The edges can be surprisingly thin, and they're eventually replaced by egg or pear-shaped ones during the Naqada II period. I'm assuming probably due to durability issues. You know, rock, depending on the type of rock, can be very hard but rather brittle. So if you shape that into a relatively thin edge, then it's likely to crumble under impact, shatter, fracture, etc. There are disc maces in Neolithic North Central Europe as well, between 6,300 and 4,800 years ago. Some are flat, relatively thin, others are more donut-like, I suppose. Here's an example made of amphibolite, which is a type of metamorphic rock which was changed from a different type of rock by intense heat, high pressure, or other environmental influences. This one's 12.9 centimeters or 5 inches in diameter, 1.7 centimeters thick, or 5/8 for anyone who wants fractional inches for some reason.
You've got a fractional inch.
And the weight is 354 grams or 12.5 ounces. They're saying here that this is considered more of a status symbol due to its impractical shape, which is something I disagree with. More about that later. To be fair, it can be difficult to determine the purpose as a weapon with any kind of certainty because usually the haft is not preserved. And there are examples like jade discs from ancient China seem to have been artifacts from upper class burials, not weapons. This is the largest known Neolithic disc mace, 21 centimeters in diameter or 8¼ inches. For visual reference, it's about this size. That's no joke. And this was found in Germany, made of serpentinite, which is also a type of metamorphic rock. And here's an interesting form from Bronze Age Luristan, which is modern-day Western Iran. This one's about 3,000 to 4,000 years old. This is smaller than you might expect, and it's quite a stout shape. Also, of course, bronze over stone has the advantage that it has higher toughness. Then we've got pre-Columbian finds before the 1530s. Some are flat stone discs, much like in Neolithic Europe. Many are knobs, spheres, donuts, stars. Some are sort of flower-shaped stone maces. And then they also made some interesting serrated disc and star shapes from copper or bronze. These would transfer force pretty effectively, concentrated on that edge. And there's a particularly vicious bronze star mace. You can imagine how much those points would concentrate the force, which of course is the point. Here's a stone disc mace from Papua New Guinea, early 20th century. This is tapered into a narrow blade-like striking surface. You've got chips along the edge, likely from use, although this could also be general wear and tear from transport and handling over a century. Here's a great piece with intact haft from the 19th century. There's some braided rattan on top to help secure it and prevent it from slipping off. The disc is fairly thin and aggressively tapered. Finally, we've got a rare find, a bone disc mace from the 19th century or earlier. Now, bone is harder than most wood and not as brittle as stone, so it's not a bad choice. All right, onto the testing. This is a sharpened steel mace made by Quinn Waterfield in Alberta and commissioned by Ace the Supervillain, both of whom are Patreon supporters of mine. Speaking of which, quick shameless self-promotion. If you want to help support the channel and get bonus content like, extended edits of videos, occasional behind-the-scenes vlogs, and access to an exclusive Discord server where people hang out, talk about arms and armor, and play games together, etc., etc. Link down below. You can check it out. So let's see how it went.
Wondering if I can sort of slice with it too. Yeah, kind of. Kind of rake like that. Getting over top of the guard. Yeah, that's what I want. This is set up with bungee cord, so it's got some give. It's like a neck.
Feed it down through. Sits in the top, and the bottom pulls through.
Nice.
Busted a nut.
I did. So it doesn't even require a hard swing. It's just like, boom. If they try to dodge it and you catch them just slightly, you could cut them, but it wouldn't be serious. I probably need to hit it harder, but I kind of don't want to because that sacrifices accuracy, and then it's gonna be like, ugh,
Yeah.
But I'll give it a try. Maybe with two hands, so it's a little bit more accurate.
Oh, I was gonna say.
That's all the way open.
Oh.
It's basically only held together by the net.
All right, so why are these so rare in history? You really don't see them all that much, and to my knowledge, none ever made of iron or steel. The most you see is bronze, the most advanced, if you will. And overall, even though you find them in different parts of the world at different times, again, really not all that common. So I can only speculate, of course, but I'm guessing it probably has to do with durability issues, again, depending on the type of stone, of course, but anytime you taper something, like you grind stone down, as hard as it may be, it is rather brittle. So if you strike something hard with such a small surface, the great thing is that it concentrates a lot of the force. It goes both ways. The weapon itself also absorbs more of it, so you can get chips or cracking or parts just breaking off entirely, things like that. So it makes sense to use more robust shapes that potentially last longer. However, this was not an extremely short-lived experiment, mind you. In the big picture, if you look at history over thousands of years, then yeah, this was sort of a blip. But they did remain for several hundred years at least, or longer, depending on which region you look at. So this was not something that somebody just messed around with just to try out, and then they were like, nah, this is garbage, it doesn't work. They were using these for a while. But the transition away from disc to other shapes happened before widespread use of bronze or even copper necessarily, at which point it would have been more effective. You know, a bronze disc mace, I imagine, would be pretty good, although it would of course be much more prone to bending than steel. But you can always make it thicker. And when it comes to disc maces from Meso in South America or Papua New Guinea, they weren't discontinued for practical reasons exactly. These people were simply steamrolled and massacred by Europeans with guns, so we don't know if they would still be using them otherwise. May very well. As said, there are plenty of different forms, so many ways to make an impact weapon. It can be something as simple as, you know, this atlatl I made, which can also be used as a club. You know, anytime you taper a piece of wood so that you have more mass at the end, so it strikes harder. That's one way to do it. Another way, of course, is to attach something to the end. A spherical shape simply adds weight at the end, and of course it's usually made of harder material than the wooden haft itself. So that in and of itself hits harder. And if you want to increase the effect more, then you can shape it so that less surface area gets in contact with the target. So you concentrate more of the force on a smaller surface, and you can do that with knobs, spikes, etc. This thing is functionally sort of like a perpendicular omni axe. You know, you've got the sharp edge going all the way around, but it's rotated, and the different alignment makes for a very different effect as it hits something. You know, with the axe, when it hits something, since you're swinging in an arc, this will want to follow through, you know, along with the edge, you know, in the direction of the edge, so you can kind of pull it through. If you strike something like that, it's not going to follow through. What it is going to do is it's going to penetrate up until the haft, but because you're not striking like this straight forward, but rather in an arc, this would enter first up to the haft, and because the arc continues, it's then going to basically exert some downward pressure so it can enter and then pry the wound open. I think this would be particularly devastating on a skull because it may actually break a piece of bone out. And of course there is a certain amount of blunt impact force as well that can cause trauma to inner organs, things like that. So it's not a weapon I would dismiss. Definitely would not want to be hit by it anywhere really. Also somewhat like an axe, you can hook with it potentially. To an extent, that depends on the diameter of the disc. If it's a very small disc, then you're not going to be able to do too much with it. But the larger it is, the more potential you have to hook an enemy's weapon. And as opposed to an axe, where you can only do that in one direction, basically, with this you could do it any way you want. You know, you can hook like this, you can come from the other side, you can even hook from the bottom. Like, for example, if you wanted to hook the bottom of a shield or over top of the shield, of course. I have no idea if they ever did that, but it's theoretically plausible. Then we've got the advantage of simplicity. This is a pretty easy weapon to make. In case of stone, it's probably not as easy. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of grinding away at it, but you know, casting it out of copper or bronze, or you know, forging it out of iron or steel doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's a pretty simple shape after all, and it doesn't have to be perfectly circular. Like this one isn't either. Like it doesn't have to be 100% perfect circle, and it's easy to have too. All you need is a tapered stick. You just put it through one end, tap it on the ground until it's seated, and there you go. And vice versa, if you want to take it off, again, you tap it, slide it off, It's very, very easy to replace if you want. There are also some drawbacks depending on specifically how it's shaped. This particular one is quite short, and of course less reach is a disadvantage, but I wouldn't really want it much longer than this because, you know, this is already not the fastest kind of weapon. You know, something like this, or the clubs that Rick made that I tried out, those are much faster and hit quite hard as well. If you think about the advantage of a simple club or mace, you know, kind of omnidirectional where it doesn't matter how you hit, you know, that's on one end of the spectrum. Like, this is the easiest to use. It does not matter how you connect, like any angle is going to do the same. Whereas with an axe, it does matter, not as much as with a sword, but edge alignment still matters. You don't want to hit partially flat because then it's going to glance, it's going to not be as effective, it's not going to bite in as well. And then this is pretty much in the middle. It doesn't matter how I rotate it, you know, whichever way, I can hit like this or like this, they do kind of weird directions, and it's all going to pretty much connect the same way. The only difference is at which point of the arc you hit, essentially, because what you don't want to do is hit with this first. Say, you know, if the angle is too steep, let's say you're trying to hit over top of someone's guard and you just hit them with this. Now, this is still going to hurt, don't get me wrong, because it's weighted, but then you're not going to make contact with the edge as much, which you generally want to. Somewhat more limiting than this, but it also, again, concentrates more force. And you can definitely tweak it the way you want. You can use a longer haft, a smaller diameter disc, or a thinner disc, or whatever, really. You could use a large, thin diameter disc, or, you know, more of a donut shape, whatever you want, really. So there are a number of options, and yeah, the simplicity is definitely a benefit there. Right, there's another drawback I almost forgot to mention. Carrying this thing is a little bit inconvenient. You know, like an axe in comparison, you can just tuck it in your belt, and it's not really in the way. It's mostly flush against the body, and, you know, it doesn't really bother you a whole lot. This, on the other hand, it's a little bit more in the way. Yeah, kind of sucks a little bit. I can't really think of any good way to make this work. You definitely don't want to have it dangle from the belt the other way, because that's probably going to beat up your leg. It also depends, of course, whether it's a stone disc mace, which is not ground to a terribly sharp edge, or steel with a fairly sharp edge. There aren't really too many good ways to do this. You would need basically a special kind of sheath that goes over it, and yeah, this is pretty much the only way. I mean, it could be worse. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not fantastic. It's going to be a little bit in the way. Now, to be fair, the same is true for a basket hilt sword. These are not convenient to wear by any means. In fact, now that I have both on, this is worse. So people have carried more cumbersome things on their hip, and of course, spiked maces are even worse than this. Like a spiked mace, you really cannot carry comfortably on the belt. You pretty much have to just hold it in your hand or attach it to your backpack or something like that. Speaking of backpack, the easiest way to transport it, of course, would be to simply take off the disc and store it separately. That way it's not ready, but it's very easy because then it's more flat. Another thought, I wonder how effective it would be if you combined it with a golden dog, or maybe just a blade. You know, if you had a spike or blade here, you'd be able to thrust with it, which is useful, and if you strike something, you know, with this part, that would still be more effective than just the haft. So that might be worth trying out at some point. I guess it would also be interesting to test a variation that has multiple smaller discs at certain intervals. And of course, a star-shaped disc mace would be seriously brutal. That would also be highly effective against armor, even hard armor. So there's definitely a lot of potential. Very overlooked weapon in general. And if you're looking for, something different for a fantasy setting or, historical fantasy or whatever you want, whatever you're writing or designing or drawing or whatever, then yeah, this might be an idea. Definitely underused. So hope you found it interesting. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks. Skip right ahead to the testing or elsewhere, what do I know, straight to the outro if you're a weirdo, I don't know. They're generally made of from Meso and South America and 5,900 to 5,700 years ago. And they're made, between 6,000, I cannot fucking talk today. Between six, it's not a hard number. 666.
Taste the blood of your enemies.